Okay, so it's very, very great to see you in person. I've really missed this, like seeing people. If I tell a joke, maybe someone will laugh. I can look into your eyes, so that's going to be really cool. So, yeah, let's get right into it. My name is Lian Lee. Thanks for coming. I'm really glad to be the first speaker after the keynote, so hopefully I don't put you to sleep already. I'm an engineering manager at a company called Container Solutions. We are a consultancy that is focusing on programmable infrastructure, lots of Kubernetes stuff. Obviously, we're called Container Solutions. Very close to being called Docker Solutions, by the way, so glad that that didn't happen. And yeah, I'm an engineering manager there, so I support our engineers there, but I'm also a consultant myself, or we call ourselves cloud native engineers. And I'm based in Amsterdam, but before I lived in Hamburg for 10 years, so it's really, really nice to be back, and I'm glad that they let me back in. Numbers are not great in the Netherlands right now. So I'm already seeing that my clicker is not working. That is great. Okay. I'm also one of the organizers for Serverless Days Amsterdam. We are part of the global Serverless Days family of community events. If you're interested in that, there's also a Serverless Days in Hamburg, by the way. Really cool people. I used to work with them, actually, so shout out to them. And if you're interested, in the topic, or maybe you want to speak, or maybe you want to help out, then, find me and speak to me about that as well. Cool. So we're going to talk today about why Kubernetes won't save you. And, before you say anything, actually, serverless also won't save you. Because it's not really about the technology, it's about your culture. It's about your culture of problem solving, about your culture of adapting to change and building trust and resilience within your organization. And everything I'll tell you about today is based on, my experience, anecdotal evidence, if you so will, from working in tech for the last 10, 11 years now. I started as a software engineer, and then I kind of made my way from back-end to front-end, back to back-end to DevOps, did a little bit of data engineering, so kind of touched everything. And now I'm working in the DevOps space. So yeah, let's first talk a little bit about the state of Kubernetes right now. So first, I would like to ask you, because you are representing the 1,000 people that I've heard are attending today, so could you please, if you so will, do a show of hands if you've ever heard about Kubernetes? Ever heard anything about Kubernetes? Raise your hand. That's, I would say, 80 to 90% maybe? Okay, well, keep your hands up, keep your heads up. Okay, so who would like to use it in production? If you don't want to use it in production, to put your hand down. If you'd like to use it in production, keep your hand up. Okay, that's about the same number. Keep your hands up. Okay. Who has already used it in production? If you have already used it in production, keep it up. Okay, that's still a lot of people. So who would like to use it in production, but not the way that you are using now? Okay, so if you're happy with how you're using it now, you put your hand down. If you're not happy, keep it up. So, okay, so there's still some hands up. Okay, cool. So all I wanted to show you is we've all heard about it. We probably all heard about the super cool stuff that you can do with it, but a lot of times that's actually not the truth. That's actually not what we actually do. A lot of people that I've seen, a lot of companies that I've spoken to, they kind of misuse Kubernetes. And that's a little bit, the core of what I want to talk about today. Okay, so thanks for your participation, by the way. I know it's a bit weird to be back in a space like this. So this image is taken from a white paper that our CTO, Ian Crosby, wrote about 2-3 years ago, probably. It's called Crossing the Chasm. And this image is based on Geoffrey A. Moore's book, Crossing the Chasm, in which he basically says that for any technology or product, there's a technology adoption life cycle. And usually, you would start over here in the early market, and then at some point there's this chasm. And once you cross that, then you are in the mainstream market, and from then on, it kind of like develops its own life. It will just be adopted more and more without you having to push it as much as you did before. So this image, as I said, is about 2 or 3 years old. I would argue that by now, we have already crossed the chasm. We are at this point, maybe we're even like at late majority. Definitely seen a lot of things move in this space. So yeah, my argument is that Kubernetes has already become mainstream, and that is both good and bad at the same time. So what I mean by that is, take a look at these articles that these headlines were taken from the last, I'd say, 5 years or so. And what they kind of all point to, this is, by the way, a great story about Pivotal, who were consulting with Ford, and then because Ford said we still cannot do Kubernetes properly, but Kubernetes is the industry standard, you have not consulted us correctly, and that's how they sued them for $200 million. And I think they also won, because the judge bought that argument that Kubernetes is the industry standard. So I encourage you to look up these stories later, the links are on the slide, because, as I said, they all kind of point to this idea that Kubernetes is becoming the industry standard, but at the same time, people are slowly waking up from this dream that you just bring in Kubernetes and it will just take care of everything. It will fix everything. So in fact, just as any other technology or anything really, you have to actually also put some elbow grease into it and also use your head. So to me, there are 2 points to how people misunderstand the problem, or maybe 2 aspects. One of them is the attitudes toward technology, the attitude towards your product, your business, the value that you're actually providing. And the other is the attitude towards the concept of work and team and culture, and how do we actually provide value together as people. So I'm going to talk about the one thing first, which is, going cloud native. What does cloud native even mean? I don't know if you have a good definition for that. I've, looked around a little bit, and for example, I found this. This is from the CNCF Carta, and it defines cloud native as cloud native technologies empower organizations to build and run scalable applications in modern dynamic environments, such as public, private, and hybrid clouds, container service meshes, microservices, immutable infrastructure, and declarative APIs exemplify this approach. So first, this is a very technical definition. At the same time, it also doesn't really define cloud native. It says that this is what cloud native technologies do, and then it gives a lot of examples of ways that kind of do that. But it doesn't say this is cloud native and this is not cloud native. And as I said, it's purely about technology. So at Container Solutions, so disclaimer, this is a little bit of a salesy pitch maybe, we have this thing called the Cloud Native Maturity Matrix. And in there, we have these different rows, dimensions, if you so will, and the columns, which are kind of the stage in which you're in, of which Cloud Native is one. So this is Cloud Native, and there are a lot of dimensions and axes on which you can measure how far you are. So when we meet a client for the first or second time, we would talk to them, do an assessment or discovery, or I think it's called a cloud native assessment now. And then we will check where on this matrix the organization currently lies. And then it could maybe look like this, where the goal obviously is go full cloud native over here. And right now the company is, where this blue line is. And the point is here that it visualizes all these different, aspects of cloud native, which in our mind consists of culture, processes, and technology. And as an example, so a lot of experts in the CN space recommend microservice architecture. But if you, so microservice architecture, I should have checked this better. If you have it, that's here in architecture. If you have that, but you're still, using waterfall, then it will not yield the best results for you because you're still carrying like legacy processes around with you. So even though you have microservices, you still have to deploy them all at once because you don't have the processes to support that. So only when you couple microservices with an agile and lean mindset, let's say, then will you be able to leverage all the fast and flexible goodness of cloud native. That is the point of this slide. And I'm sure we can debate, about individual definitions here. Like, I don't know if serverless is really the next thing in provisioning, but that's not necessarily the point. The point is there are different dimensions to cloud native. And if you are interested to look more deeply in the matrix, you can follow this link, and then you can just click through it and check it out for your own organization if you want, and then just see where you are. So there's another aspect of how we misunderstand the problem, which is that we just solved the wrong problem. So this XKCD, which is always an XKCD, obviously, it's called automation. And so in this image, what we see is there's, some person has to do a task that's probably very annoying and very manual. So they think okay, maybe if I automate it, then at some point, the automation will take over all the work, and then I have all this free time for other stuff. But what happens actually usually, a lot, is that you start writing the automation code, then you have to debug, and then you have to rethink, and then you redesign, and suddenly you are just putting all your time into this automation thing to the point that you don't have time for the original thing that you were supposed to do anymore. I am almost 100% certain that either you have experienced this yourself, or you know someone who has, or you work with someone who has, because it's a very common thing among engineers. And this is like the little brother of the sunken cost fallacy. So I have a little story about a time that we solved the wrong problem for a customer. So it was when I kind of started at CS, and we had this customer that they developed a piece of technology. It was an AI chip that could detect objects, and then it would send the picture with the metadata into a platform on which you would further do some other AI stuff. So it was AI, IoT. We wrote the backend in Kotlin. We did some cool TypeScript stuff in the front end. It was really, really interesting in terms of technology. It was a super great project. So we built this platform. Everything was in microservices. It was on Kubernetes. It ran on GKE. It was highly available, blah, 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 all the good stuff. Then the customer pushed us to deliver a demo with investors and press. And the use case completely changed because suddenly they didn't need high availability on the cloud anymore. They wanted everything to run on one physical server. Okay, that works, right? We can run a single node Kubernetes cluster. The server could not be connected to the internet. Ever. Never, ever. So what they did, and I have to really, I have to say that this is a very, very well-known hardware designer. They sent us the server by mail, UPS mail. We had to install things on there. We used Helm, but it was through a USB stick, and then we had to ship it back to them. So as you can imagine, when my boss told me that, I was like, no, we are not going to do this. This is idiotic. And he's like, well, they're paying for it, right? This is that's what they want. So, there's two ways to look at this. Either we were working just on two completely different projects with completely different goals in mind, or we just had the most physical handover of a cloud application ever. It's pretty cool that This was like a thing that was supposed to run in the cloud, but we used mail to ship it. So, by the way, if you are an avid reader of XKCD, you know that if you hover over the picture, there's always like this hover text, and the text for this one reads, automating comes from the Latin word for auto, which means self, and mating, which means screwing. So, automating, screwing yourself. I think that's very apt. All right, so yeah, the thing that's really important here to understand is a design principle, form follows function, which simply means the shape of the shape of a building or object should primarily relate to the intended function or purpose. It's not a super amazing thought per se. Basically, just first think about what you want something to do, and then think about what it should look like. Makes a lot of sense, but when we transfer this to like business, especially technology, you can see there's a lot of companies that use like AI, blockchain, Kubernetes, whatever, simply because everyone is doing it, with no added value to their actual business, the actual product, the actual value they're trying to produce. What I'm thinking about tech is that tech is a byproduct of problem solving. You're solving the problem, and tech is just the way that you get to it, but the less tech you need, the better. A lot of people say code is your asset. That's not true. Code is cost. Your asset is the business capability that you provide. Very important thing. You need to ask yourself, is your tech still solving the core problem and contributing to your core business, or has it kind of begun to have a life of itself, like some kind of Frankenstein monster that you have to like feed with more resources and more people, and really it doesn't do anything for you? So there's this way that you can think about your business, developed by Simon Sinek. It's called the Golden Circle. I'm not going to go too deeply into it because I'm running a bit out of time. But basically, what you can do is you first think about the what. So what is the thing that I actually offer to my client? What is my product? What is the service? Let's say you're selling cameras. So the what is cameras. Okay. The next question is, how are you doing this? What are your strengths, your values? So if you're selling cameras, maybe you have an amazing customer support. So the how is by really supporting your customers. Like you're the greatest in like understanding what your customer needs. And then finally, in the center, you ask yourself, why? So what is your purpose? What is your belief? Let's say you believe every person has an artistic, core to themselves, and through your great customer support, you really unlock people's creativity and then sell them some cameras. The reason why this circle thing works is because people don't remember your product. People remember your brand. People remember, your purpose. People know what Apple stands for before they bring out anything. But like if people were asking me like, what does Lenovo stand for? I'd be like, I don't know. ThinkPads probably. So to round this part up, take this quote from Tatiana Mack with you. If you're in machine learning, by the way, this is very important. A solution is only as good as the framing of your problem. If you don't understand your problem, you cannot find a good solution for it. It's that simple. All right, so I have about 12 minutes. Okay, so the second part is around the cloud-native mindset or the attitude towards culture, towards working together, towards like people in your workforce. So in the cloud-native world, there are maybe some ways that you have to think about working together differently than you did before. Namely, so continuous learning is something that's becoming more and more important because we are all new at this. Like Kubernetes was released 6-7 years ago, I think, by now. And I know recruiters are looking for like 15 years of Kubernetes experience. But the point is that things move so fast in the cloud-native space, you are constantly learning. If you're not constantly learning, you are falling behind. And most, if not all, modern paradigms in the tech industry now kind of show the similar trend of moving away from very, very long-running processes like waterfall, and doing things like agile, for example, that lets you fail fast and learn from that. So you would have like these processes where you have like 2-week sprints, for example. You do something, you evaluate, you have a retrospective, see this works, this doesn't work, so we're going to change our process a tiny bit, and then restart this again. And I think that's really good. I really like Scrum. I like it more than Waterfall. I'm not going to say I really like it, but there's things I like less. And I think because of this failing fast and often, you are in this perpetual loop of optimizing your process. And we call this Kaizen or continuous learning. Now, to be able to do that over a long time, what you also need for your people is psychological safety, because you just constantly fail and you constantly talk about the things that didn't work. And you're really digging deep into that with your postmortems and your like root cause analysis. People need to be resilient. They need to have the feeling that it's okay for them to fail, because or it's even important for them to fail. So you need to create a culture that encourages failing and learning from it. Obviously, you have to also learn from it, otherwise there's no point to it. That also means that you need to be able to have people look into themselves and not take themselves too seriously, and like be okay with making mistakes. This requires abilities like responsibility, self-efficacy, which means that you believe that you can do things. You believe you're capable of pretty much everything as long as you get the time to learn that. And yeah, so psychological safety, as I said, is very crucial. And you can look at this grid to illustrate that thought a little bit better. If you have if you're in an organization where your accountability is low and the psychological safety is low, you just don't do anything because no one expects anything from you. You have no responsibilities. And if you were doing anything, you'd immediately get called out for it. So obviously, I'm doing nothing. But if, for example, you have a high accountability, but still psychological safety, then you're constantly anxious. Just because you have a lot of responsibility, you need to do a lot of things, but every time you do the tiniest little thing wrong, you immediately get slapped with something. And lastly, if you have high psychological safety, so you can fail, it's fine, no problem, but you don't have a lot of responsibility, no one really expects anything from you, then you tend to get comfortable. You're not being pushed, you're not being there's no demand on you. So the sweet spot is really where you learn is when the psychological safety is high, you're allowed to fail, but at the same time, you are also made to be responsible for things, and there's actually a demand. The other thing is now that since everything is distributed, especially things like your microservices and such, and maybe your infra team is now not an infra team anymore, it's the AWS implementation team or whatever, you need to put a little more effort into streamlining collaboration, especially now because we can't see each other, we don't really know how the other person's feeling, what they're on about. So if you take a look at this graph, this is from Team Topologies, which is a book that I highly recommend. And the authors have taken a look at how engineering teams, specifically DevOps teams in cloud-native organizations, work together. And they defined the 3 modes of interaction. So there is the collaboration mode, which is the one that we're all most familiar with. It's kind of just 2 teams work together on a thing. For example, if you deliver software, if you're deploying something, there are some companies that have collaboration between the DevOps or the operations team and the development team, which is nice, but it takes a lot of time because it takes both the team's time fully, and they have to work together, which causes a little bit of friction. So this is very, very labor intense. Usually you would do that for a fixed time. You wouldn't do this forever. And sometimes also makes sense to collaborate to discover new things like APIs or practices. The next example here is the facilitation, where one team helps the other. Again, if you take the example of delivery, the ops team could help the development team to deploy, but they're not actively collaborating. They're just saying like, okay, this is what you need to do. You need to click here. You need to run the script, whatever. Ideally, after facilitating, one team knows a bit more about the thing that they've just worked together than before. Finally, and this is I guess the favorite, is the X as a service team. So take again delivery. Now the DevOps team have built a GitOps platform. So they're just providing delivery as a service. They don't really need to get involved with the other team anymore, hopefully. All they need to do is provide the service, write good docs, like maintain it, have a good, bug report system, and ideally, this will be the only time that the two teams actually interact with each other. So the idea is not that you have to do everything as a service, but just that there are 3 different modes. Some take more time than others, but some also make more sense. Like collaboration, if you're trying to come up with best practices, you should collaborate. The X as a service does not make sense here. Okay, so to bring this to about an end, I said Kubernetes won't save you. And the point is, and this is also taken from team topologies, is that you shouldn't do a transformation because you looked at Kubernetes and you really want to use it, but you should use Kubernetes or the technology that works for you. It doesn't have to be Kubernetes. It could be, Tanzu or whatever. But you use the technology because you're doing a transformation. Think about the core business value that you're providing. Focus on that and use the tool that will help you with that. So I said Kubernetes won't save you, and what I mean is that Kubernetes alone is not going to save you, but if you have the right mindset, then Kubernetes might be what you need to save yourself. And with that, if you're interested and you're like, okay, she seems to know what she's talking about, so if you are still not scared of the cloud or you absolutely have to move into the cloud, what I can leave you with is the Cloud Native Transformation Kit. And it's totally free. You can go check out the book that's written by our CRO and CEO. And in this book, you'll find these pattern cards. Patterns, just ways to solve a specific problem repeatedly. And there are some ideas what you can do to tackle specific problems, like how can you build, for example, build remote teams to facilitate better collaboration, etc., etc. You can do like a cool workshop with it. So yeah, that is it. Thank you very much for listening. And if you have any questions, we have a lot of time for me to answer them. Thanks.
Thank you.